All right, this is one of my favorite times of the conference. It's when we have an opportunity to ask questions that maybe aren't being answered. Matt, you've heard some of the best preaching, great teaching upstairs for 2 days. This afternoon, this morning, all of this. But a lot of times, they're just things, you're just itching. Matter of fact, there was a brother that came up to me at lunch and said, look, I don't want to ask this question, but can it be asked? And I might just start asking that question this morning. Rick, if you'll get one of our wireless. And Brother David, yep. All right. We get a lot of feedback. This will just help expedite. What we do is we just ask you to raise your hand. Rick and I will be runners. We'll come to you. State your name, where you're from, okay? That kind of gives us an idea, reference who you are. And then you can ask a direct question to any of these men, okay? Yeah, if you're sitting on a mic, it's not going to help you sit on it. Everybody got a mic? Everybody got a mic? Make sure you're not sitting on the mic. Make sure you're not sitting on the mic. Good. All right, let me get this one right here to someone. Who would like one? Individually? Here, y'all. All right. Good. I have requested that these guys just kind of be prepared for shotgun. I don't have any idea what you're going to ask. You can ask individually. You've heard most of them speak, or you know who they are. If there's a direct question you want to ask, just say, Dr. So-and-so, brother whatever, or first name whatever. You ask them the question. If it's a general question, just ask a general question. And if one of them doesn't rapidly put the mic up to their mouth, I will select one of you to answer the question. So it might be safer just go for it, okay? But this is one of my favorite times because you get to hear the hearts of these men. What I want you to do, I want you to introduce yourself. I'd like for you just to share your name, where you pastor, or what your ministry is now. And just do it in a nutshell, and we'll go from my left all the way over to Dr. Passport. So, Rodney, you start, and then we'll get into our questions out here.
Rodney Keith, pastor Garden View Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida.
Tim Maynard, pastor Fruit Cove Baptist in Jacksonville.
Eddie Eaton, pastor of West Pittman Baptist Church here in Holmes County.
Rich Kinsel, pastor at Manual, Tallahassee.
I think you all know me.
Y'all speak up.
I'm Sean Johnson, pastor of First Baptist Church in Dowling Park.
I'm Herb Revis, pastor of North Jacksonville Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida.
I'm Jerry Passmore, and I really don't know what my position is, to tell you the truth.
And listen, this guy is Mr. ERC, Evangelism Response Center. You went to a clinic, somebody this morning, on answering the telephone, getting people in your church trained to answer the telephone. You need to get in touch with him. These folks can minister at home. They don't have to go anywhere. They just stay at home, answer the phone, and start sharing Jesus with people. That's what he does, and he's the best in the country at it. Okay, here we go. First question. Raise your hand. Let us see. What question do you have? You've always wanted to ask experts. Come on, it'll get you rolling in a minute. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. All right, Dean? Who you are and where you from?
I'm Dean Spot. I guess I got concerns with the question. I'm concerned about Washington and articles that were posted in our Florida paper was Jay Ruth giving a large market given for the recognition given. Just wondered if any of you had, if I'm just concerned about nothing that you need concerned about, or do you have concerns about it, or make it good in life?
Maybe put it in a nutshell, Dean. Are you saying what you need to clarify that just a little bit? What do you want them to directly answer? I mean, we all read the article from David Youth. Okay. Okay, and the rest were okay. CP. What do you think about CP? So just one of you share how we're handling it and articles like that.
think Dr. Maynard would be the proper person to respond to that.
The president of the Florida Baptist Convention.
Such an easy question. You're going to let me have it, right, Dr. Passmore? Okay, let me be careful. First of all, David and I are friends. David has every right to do what David wants to do, and every church is autonomous. Every church makes their own decisions, and they need to deal with that before the Lord, not worrying about what other people think about that. However, I'm concerned. Let me just say, in a generic sense, and I've been a Southern Baptist my whole life, and I'm still a hardcore Southern Baptist. I still am an advocate of, a supporter of the cooperative program. I still do not think. I do not think we have a better way to support missions than through the cooperative program. We don't have a better way. I heard a number of years ago one of the leading Pentecostal preachers who was talking about their mission efforts, and they said nobody has a better program and a better way to send and support missionaries than Southern Baptists. That's other denominations. We have it down. I don't know what needs to be fixed is my problem. I'm not sure where I see that there are areas, and I know that there are always things we can tweak on, but for the most part, we have the best methodology, the best way of sending missionaries, supporting missionaries, while not letting go of our concerns at home. We need to reach the world. Listen, one of my best friends on earth is a guy named Nick Ripken. Some of you have read his book on the insanity of obedience and the insanity of God. He's my best friend on earth. He is an IMB missionary. I will always be a Southern Baptist as long as he's a Southern Baptist. I'm going to support him and the work that they're doing around the world. But, folks, we have multiple concerns. As Dr. Sullivan says so well over and over again, we have to go into all the world and do all of these things locally, nationally, and internationally at the same time. The Great Commission is not a multiple choice option. And I think we have responsibilities in mission work in America as well as around the world. The CP, in my estimation, is still the best way to do it. We are in a time when churches are moving towards societal giving, which basically puts us back pre-cooperative program. I don't know, some of you may remember days when individuals in different groups would come to your church and beg for money. We're setting ourselves back up to do that again. So the most appealing person, the most appealing cause can come and stand in your pulpit and beg you for money and beg your church for money, while some very, very good causes that need support may not have as appealing a spokesperson, and they're going to go begging because they don't have somebody that really knows how to ask for money. That's what we're going back to. I'm not for that. I do not want to see that happen. I have stronger opinions about it than I'm going to say right here. But I'm telling you right now, I think we have got our hands on the best way to do mission work around the world, and I don't know that we need to abandon that for another process. That's just my opinion as a pastor. Please hear that. So, all right.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak to it, please?
Well, I agree completely. Our church, over the last couple of years, has committed to each budget year increase our giving to the cooperative program. Our church is really kind of unique because we sit right outside of the gate of Florida's oldest and first retirement community. It's the Advent Christian Village, who brings in a myriad of retired pastors and missionaries from around the world. In my church, I have like 7 different denominational backgrounds, and between 25 and 30 retired missionaries from various denominational backgrounds. And every one of them they give openly and generously to the cooperative program because they spent so much of their time on furlough trying to get funds, and they see what Southern Baptists have been doing and are doing, and they're blown away by that. And I hear that same word as they say, Pastor, Southern Baptists have it right. I wish we would have discovered that, So I definitely agree. I'm 100% cooperative program and will always be. I believe it is one of the crown jewels of our convention.
I agree with both of these guys. It's the greatest tool out there for sharing the gospel and getting the gospel around the world. If I've got my facts right, back in the 80s, the average church was giving 10 to 11% to the cooperative program. I think that number is down to less than 3 on average. I think it's a lack of education in our churches. Most of our people in our churches do, if they've heard the cooperative program, they've heard it through the special offerings, they have no idea how the cooperative program is impacting missions around the world. And I think we as pastors and we as ministry leaders in our churches have to do a better job of educating our folks, not just assuming that they all know, and I think that's what you were speaking to, not just assuming that these people that we're bringing into our churches have been Southern Baptists all their life and they understand what the cooperative program is. I just think it's a lack of education from the leaders of the church to the congregation.
That is a good word. We all have taken over that and need to do a better job. And I think our convention does a pretty good job with some of the promotion and the DVDs they send out. So when things come from the convention, be sure to look at what you've got. There's a lot of good cooperative program tools you can use to pop in on a Sunday morning and let it run and roll throughout the year. There's a lot of good things coming down the pipe that we do try to share. Hard question to ask. Thank you for asking. That is a good question. We do it a lot. Obviously, I'm very CP plus big time. All right. And all right. Another question. Not everybody wants that. Just one time. All right. While you're thinking, the question was asked by a pastor who's here. He's in a church and just cannot get the church to follow. Just seems like nobody's following and just kind of listening to the heartbeat. The church is going to die if something happens soon. How do you get a church to follow you? What are just an ABC or 1, 2, 3 real quick? How do you get a church to follow you? You're in a smaller area, in a rural area. You're not in a mega city where there's 1,500,000 people. Sean is out where maybe you see from the front door of his church 3 houses, maybe if you're real lucky, and you have to drive away to find the next one. This brother right here, I didn't think I'd ever find his church with a garment. Going down a dirt road out here, 25 minutes from here, and we went to lunch in Alabama. That's how far out under it is, all right? Y'all might want to speak to this, being smaller churches. The other brothers in a little bit larger churches. Speak to it. How do you hold on to your the team you've got, the group, the pastor, or people you have in the church?
I'm kind of out of the norm in many ways. I was a healthcare administrator. I went to the University of Florida, go Gators, and had my plan. God called me into full-time ministry. Walking down the hallway in front of my office at the nursing home that I was administrator of. Started pastoring a church of 8. They voted me in on a Sunday night. 4 of them were my family. And it went pretty well.
How'd the vote go?
We may not want to disclose that. They never told me.
It was at least 4 to 4.
It's at least 4 to 4. And so I came out with no seminary education, saying, number one, Lord, how do I prepare a sermon? How do I pastor a church? And I started praying for God just to give me a vision for what He had in store for Dowling Park, because I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a theological background other than Sunday school. I taught Sunday school class and that, but I said, Lord, you're going to have to do this. And one Sunday afternoon in my living room, God just laid upon my heart. He says, you know, it's not by your might or your strength, but my power that you're going to do any of this. And I said, Lord, you're going to have to give me the vision. And He did. He just began to show me a vision for what we had for Dowling Park. The motto of the church when I stepped in there was already sharing the joy of Jesus, so there was already a spark of evangelism there. And we began to move forward with that. And I just shared from my heart, not an oh me, but an amen. As a matter of fact, I had a fellow, he made me a little sign that I could flip it around and say, we're turning our oh me's into amens. And we did that week after week after week. And more of our folks began to go out and knock on doors and share the vision of what God had in store for Dowling Park. And it's just been really neat to see that. Consistency is the key. Is staying on your knees before the Lord every Saturday night before Sunday morning service. I'm in the sanctuary asking God for the word for tomorrow, and staying consistent with the vision that God, and not making my vision because I don't have a clue, but God has the plan. And that's really how I have seen it happen, is through God's Spirit moving in the hearts and minds of people through a vision from Him that's consistently proclaimed from the pulpit.
Anyone else?
Well, I don't know who asked the question, but I've been on both sides of that. I've pastored 2 churches. First church was for 10 years. I've been at my church now, May will be 9 years. And the first church was a nightmare. I'll just tell you. It was 10 years of heavy plowing, trying to get people motivated to do what I felt like they needed to do and what I felt like the Bible was telling us to do. And it just never happened. It never went well. I resigned. Didn't have another church to go to at the time. Didn't feel like I was being led anywhere else at the time. I just had gotten tired and resigned. Planted my family in a church with a pastor I greatly respect, and so I wasn't dragging them all over the place, and I just preached everywhere, which was awesome. Not having to worry about anything, just preach. And I did that for a couple of months, and the church I'm at now called me, and this is probably not what you want to hear, but this is what happened. Went and talked to that church, and I've never heard this in a Southern Baptist church before, but I met with the search committee, and the search committee looked at me, and I looked at them, and they said, listen, we just want you to know something up front. We've been here this many years. We've been through this many pastors, and we're mainly the fault of that. And they pointed the finger at themselves, and they said, we believe you're the leader for this church, and we're ready to follow. And I say that to say this: I didn't do anything. I just showed up, and the church was ready to follow. My first Sunday, I think we had about 32. As David says, you can't find us unless you're looking for us. And right now we're averaging about 135, and hopefully starting to build a new sanctuary come January. So that's what God does apart from us, is the best way I could understand
You
it.
believe you're where you're supposed to be. Obviously, you're there. Stick to it, and just plow
Hey, Dave, could I
close
say-
to the corn.
Can I say a quick word?
Yes, sir.
I pastored a 150-member church in the middle of a soybean field in Kentucky for the first 10 and a half years of my ministry. My son-in-law just took a church similar to that in Russellville, Alabama. And I told him this is what I always believe. Any church will let you preach to them. Some churches will let you pastor them, and some churches will let you lead them. But you can't get that out of order. You can't walk in on your first day and expect to lead the church. You can come in and preach, and then you're going to have an opportunity to pastor, and then you'll have an opportunity to lead. And I think that's...
Preach. Say it with me. Preach. Pastor. Lead. Say it again. Preach. Pastor. Lead. That's pretty good stuff. That's a book coming. That's awesome. That's good. All right. Another question. Another question. All right. Right in the back. First hand I saw there. Sir, name and where are you from?
I'm Bob Smith. I'm the pastor at Magnolia Baptist Church in Laurelville, Florida. It's a very small rural church, and this isn't necessarily a question. This is a praise to God and an answer to prayer. I've been going through a lot of doubt over the last few years on whether or not to leave the church. And I prayed for God to give me the answer. And He gave me the answer. And I thank you, gentlemen, for having the servant's heart to come here and to share your heart with us and to care about the pastors. We need it. Thank you.
Hey, David, let me say this. We prayed for you Wednesday night. This whole association prayed for you Wednesday night.
Up front, I think there was one. Okay, and somebody over there, if you'll raise it, you'll get you next. All right.
Dallas, Holmes Creek Baptist Church. Before I ask my question, can we pray for this brother? Absolutely. Do you mind if I do? Father, I just thank you so much for my brother's word of testimony, Lord, and Lord, having been there and struggled and been on the other side of that, Lord, I know what the hurt is, Lord. And Lord, I pray that you would reach down and give him a fresh vision of you, Lord, that you would give him a hunger to preach your word, and Lord, the endurance to face whatever comes. I wanted to ask real quickly if you guys could give us a word about longevity in your churches. It seems like you guys have been there for some time. So you start with Brother Rodney and just kind of go to just tell us how long you've been there and maybe to piggyback on the back of this, when you actually became the pastor, like my brother just shared there. So.
Well, I've been there a little over 3.5 years. When I got there, they were discouraged because there's not 60 people in the crowd. I was on staff with Dr. Revis, his staff evangelist, and felt led of God going back in the pastorate. And basically, I know that I hear a lot of guys say that it takes years to be the pastor, but they were so discouraged with the last several pastors they had, they never really had a pastor. And so my wife said, let's go into this real gentle. Let's don't do much. Let's just sit back and preach and love the people. But after the first Sunday, we had 26 people join that Sunday morning. And they said, we're ready to take off, and we haven't stopped since. And so it's been good.
Real quickly, we're not going to go over the thoughts, okay? We got other questions. Anybody else want to? Yes. It is an amazing thing that what Rodney's gone through.
I'll be there 9 years in May. Longevity is the key. A 2-year pastorate, a 3-year pastorate, you don't even know your people, much less their people, if you get what I'm saying. I think that's one of the hindrances that we're having in churches, and that's why we have so many people in churches that are hurting, is because they've been through the cycle of a pastor every 2 years, a pastor every 3 years, and they just get used to one, and then he leaves, and then they're starting all over again. And I think that's why some of our churches have trouble trusting leadership, is because they don't know when leadership's going to leave. I'll tell you what happened with me. The first 4 years, every time a visitor came in the door, they thought it was a search committee. And they would come to me saying, is that a search committee? And it got discouraging for me because I kept telling them, listen, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And every time I turned around, I'm getting asked if there's a search committee or is your resume out or whatever. It took them 4 years to realize that I was staying. And after that 4-year period, things went from here to here. And they know I'm there now. And I think that gives them some sense of security.
Question. And by the way, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And by the way, what this brother did a while ago praying for Bob, that's exactly what we ought to do. When people come up to us and ask about prayers, oh yeah, I'll pray for you, and then we forget about it. That was a great example for us to follow.
Those of us who have been around a while need to remember that we're going to be around until God calls us home. When you go to the church I'm in now, I've been in large churches, and I had some health problems and had to slow down. You'd be surprised how quickly you get well when you get out from one of those stressful situations. I went into a church. I've been there. Easter Sunday will be 12 years. They have, since 1947, had a new pastor on average every 16 months. You can't get to know the names of the people in the church. When you go there, don't start sending your resume out the next week. Climbing a ladder. You're going to start down the other side of the ladder one day, fellas. And you need to build some longevity. My friend, hit the nail on the head. If you'll love the people unconditionally. Some of these little churches, they have it by the neck. You first, you can't take it away from them. You'll have a fire on your hands if you do. You've got to win
put that message together week after week after week, and then how do you get your message to lead into evangelism? No matter what you're preaching, I think you're one of the best. No matter what you're preaching, you push in evangelism, the cross, salvation, with a strong evangelism. How do you get that in your deal? Teach us.
Well, you know, the Bible says in that passage where it says, preach the word, and you go on down a little bit, it says, do the work of an evangelist. And the word evangelist there, it's a very precise word in the Greek New Testament. It talks about, it's not using that word like where it talks in Ephesians 4 about God gave some to be evangelists. There is the calling to be a full-time vocational evangelist. But in 2 Timothy 4, that's to a pastor. And it means to preach the word, do everything you do with an evangelistic character, so that that's the driving philosophy of your ministry. So I cut my teeth with a full-time evangelist. That's who mentored me. When I was a senior in high school, he came to our church and came up to me. I was wearing a white suit and thought I was going to be an evangelist. And he said, I feel led to help you. His name was Eddie Martin. He's now with the Lord. He taught me how to win people to Christ. And I don't know, I caught that in my heart. And I went to Moody Bible Institute back in 1974 to study for the ministry, and majored in evangelism. And I'd go up to the library, and I'd lay all these books out about all the great revivals, all these great preachers. And I don't know, that's just been my passion. So whether even like if I'm preaching through a book that is targeting believers, well, there's always unbelievers there. And there's always some there that think they're believers, but they're not. There are a lot of lost people in churches. And I heard some guys say, you're not supposed to do evangelism in the church. You're supposed to just preach to the Christians and then go out. Well, I understand what he's saying, but the Lord in Matthew 10 told his disciples, go first to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Well, we got lots of the lost sheep in the house of Baptist, and a lot of people need to get saved. So I believe every time I preach at our church, there are lost people there. And they may not get saved this week, but they may get saved another week. And I'll just tell you a little crazy story that happened, how God uses preaching. And I do believe in the primacy of preaching. I believe that my task is to stand up and preach the Word of God without compromise, but always make that beeline for the cross. But one night, it was a Wednesday night, I was preaching on the second coming. And all of a sudden, there was disturbance, and I could see staff up in the balcony and staff over here, and I could tell, and I thought, my first thought was a crazy person got in the church. You know, crazy people just show up, and probably somebody's got a prophecy or trying to get the pulpit or just doing something nutty. So it was just so distracting that I just got in that happy place out there in the zone. And I thought, I'm finishing this message. And I just plowed through that message and gave the invitation. And 3 or 4 young guys came down and got saved. I mean, they were tattooed up. I'd never seen these guys before. As far as I know, they'd never been to our church except that night. And they got saved. And then after the invitation, one of the staff said, I just took a couple more guys back to the counseling. They wanted to get saved too. And I said, well, hallelujah. Then we had about a half a dozen people get saved that night. So I said, what was going on? What was going on? He said, Pastor, he said, when you started, a flying squirrel got loose in the church and started in the balcony, came down the steps, went behind you, went across the feet of the piano player, went up the other side, and we hadn't caught it yet. So I was there the night the squirrel went berserk in the North Jacksonville Baptist Church. And God saved 6 people. So what I'm telling you is even when it's crazy stuff, just preach, man, and give an invitation.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. I hear a little Jerry Clower there, don't we?
Stevens,
I think
right?
so. And you said it. You said, always preach as though there's lost people there. Listen, my wife was 30 years old, had sat under some of the greatest preaching in Memphis, Tennessee, the Bible Belt you could sit under. All these evangelists and all he had talked about had come through her church. Her daddy was a deacon. Mama was a pastor's secretary. She married me. met me, heard me preach many, many times, went on revivals with me. We went to Fort Lauderdale somewhere in the early 80s. He got trained nationally and internationally in evangelism explosion. She learned how to share Jesus with people, was leading people to Christ, lost without Jesus. Never had repented. Struggled with it and struggled with it. And on a Sunday night, on the very back row of the church at First Southern Baptist Church, Dale City, Oklahoma, our pastor, Tom Ellis, stood up that night. And he said, here's the title of my message. He said, are you sincerely saved or satanically deceived? And she said it was like a knife went through her heart, and it's almost like God said, this is your last chance, Kathy Burton. And that night she got born again. There are lost people in the church. I was preaching revival in Arkansas. 13 choir members got saved. 7 deacons got saved. The pastor's secretary got saved. Don't tell me that everybody that hears you preach week after week, bless their hearts, are saved. Well, amen. That was my time. That was fun. Woo! Yeah. All right, another question. Another question right here.
Dr. Kinsel, I kind of watch you from outside, and you got a lot going on at your church. How in the world do you handle keeping up with all the things that a pastor does? I mean, there's a lot of things. Missions, weddings, funerals, VBS, you name it. How do you handle keeping up with all that?
Brother George, thank you for that. You know, with real transparency, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. We've changed some things as our church has grown from small church to the size we are now. We've changed some things. We don't have any weddings in our church for anyone who's not a member of our church. Now that may sound harsh, but it's helpful. We've made some changes. I'm learning. You know how young I am. I'm learning to say no. I'd promised to be here. None of this needs to go out of the sanctuary. We took 66 people to the Holy Land. We landed Tuesday night, and I was beat. And I got home about 7 o'clock. All the cars were vandalized. We parked in a parking area next to the church, and I got home, and I had to study because Wednesday was coming. And I'm preaching through Revelation, and I don't know Revelation real well. Thank you, Brother Rick Shepard, for the handout today in your study. And then Sunday's coming. And then, you're going to present about VBS. Now, I did have that ready. But I had heard that I was to do a funeral last night. And not of a church member, but you don't care for the details. But an adult child of a church member. And I could not do it. And so I did not do it. I was in Bonifay, Florida last night. And that, Brother George, you know me well, that's painful and that's hard. But there are times you just got to graciously say no. But then again, the struggle. I had a lady who had surgery Wednesday or something, not to chase a rabbit, but I called her Wednesday night right before church and for worship, and I said, I didn't get by there today, but I'm going to see. Please don't come. You know what these hospital gowns look like. It'd be nicer if you came to see me after I get home. This is a strong lady in the church. And I'm telling you, on the way to Bonifay, I went by the hospital to see several people. So it's a constant struggle, and I haven't found the total victory in it.
And that's a question everybody here has, whether we're pastoring or just a hard-working layperson. But let me say this to everybody here. These men are going to walk the halls with us for the next several hours and here and there and around the dinner table and all. And I know every one of them would be very available to talk to you. But why don't you call them at some point down the road and ask them some questions. But that's the joy of having this. We've kind of set up a connection here of all of us. And there's not a one of them up here, I don't believe, that wouldn't be willing to say, yes, I want to talk to you. And so Rich Kinsel has all the answers to your questions. So everybody here, call Rich Kinsel.
It is so warm in here, y'all.
Yeah. I do.
I want to add a statement to that.
Okay.
I want to add a statement to that.
Good.
I am a firm believer that ministry is not the last thing. I'm going to be a school teacher, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be an attorney, and if none of that works out, I might be a preacher. I might be a minister of education. I have forever been firm on it's ministry first to seek if God's calling you to that, and then the other stuff is later. So children, I have 2 grown children. And so I speak to my children, and those of you who are parents, we love our kids. And as they were growing up, what about ministry? What about ministry? And my daughter always said to me, nope, nope. Well, why, baby? It's too hard. It's too much work out of the mouths of babes. She was probably in high school, Lincoln High School. And today she's married to a minister, called a ministry, went to the University of Mobile, and so.
Yeah, good. One last question. I'm going to ask Dr. Passmore this question. You've been through a lot of meetings like this. You've been a pastor for years. You know the heartbeat of a lot of our pastors. Share with us, and this will be our last question and your last comments here, but just share with us just a little bit of, just a challenge us. What's on your heart that you would like to challenge or encourage those of us that are here in this room today? Just share your heart just for a few minutes on it, please.
Well, I think I would encourage you out of my own experience. When people would think about me, they probably think about the fact that I was pastor of the Olive Church in Pensacola, and it was a successful ministry. I came there when it was small and left that when it was large. And I go back there now, and those people remember me for 2 things. Number 1, I called them on their birthday, and number 2, I gave out candy kisses to their kids. I never hear about them great sermons. I do hear, however, you were there when I needed you. And that's probably a great compliment. Olive, I don't feel like, was the greatest work that God allowed me to be a part of. My greatest work was when I went to a church right after seminary, and I had no members. It was a mission church. And I worked on that field for 2 weeks, opened the doors of the church on February the 14th, 1960, with 47 people in Sunday school and 123 people in the first preaching service. And the reason for that was because as the people began to call me not Jerry Passmore, but Jerry Workmore. I knocked on doors from daylight to dark practically for 2 weeks before we opened the doors of the church, and God honored the work. My advice to young preachers today is to work. Ken nailed it. That's a real part of the ministry. If anything is detested by the people as they look at their pastor, it is the fact that he's a lazy preacher. There's no reason for a preacher not to be prepared today when he goes to the pulpit. There's too many things available. It used to be that they got to go to the evangelism conference to hear good preaching. Now, just go to the computer or go to the television. There's all kind of you can hear good preachers anyway. I imagine one of the reasons that we don't have the attendance in our evangelism conferences now is simply because the availability of good preaching is accessible without paying the price of having to make traveling and what have you. But you need to be prepared. There are 2 or 3 things that the people will not forgive you of. Number 1, they're never going to forgive you of messing around with another woman other than your wife. And they're never going to forgive you if you're not prepared when you go to the pulpit to preach. You've got to be prepared. Herb nailed it also. You're called to preach. Well, why not do it? Yes. Be found faithful to the word. I believe if a guy will preach and pastor his people and be there when he's needed, I don't believe you're going to have too many problems.
I agree. That's good. That's a good word.
And I say that out of experience. I'm glad people would compliment me by saying, calling me Jerry Workmore. The fact that I set the example. And my staff followed my example of work. And my staff also followed my example of evangelism. I was a major of our church. I preached the same sermon just about every Sunday for 10 or 12 years, just using a different passage, simply because it was on evangelism and telling people how to be saved. Eventually, I got to become an expository preacher, starting preaching a book of the Bible, starting on Sunday morning and go to the next paragraph on Sunday night. I found that church attendance picked up a whole lot when we started doing that because they didn't want to miss the next paragraph. And so another key in your preaching is to preach expository messages with evangelistic appeal. And that's all I got to say, preacher.
Bless you. What a great word, a great closing word. A great, great closing word. I love you. I love all of you. And thank you for your time to come and be here with us, to have a heartbeat, to share, to listen, to hear, to rub shoulders with these men and women. You have a gift. You're all gifted different. You have different talents. But the spiritual gift within you is obvious today and in your ministries as we watch all of you. Let's thank them one more time. Good word. Good word.